It is going to bring a lot of ferocity. It's going to bring a lot of hazards, a lot of damage. You still have time to make the decision to ensure your safety. You do not have to get on the interstate and drive to Georgia. You don't have to drive to Pensacola. You can go to a local shelter, which would be likely tens of miles away. We also have now these state shelters. There's massive, massive amounts of room in all of those shelters. You ride it out for a night. The storm's likely going to be gone on the east coast of Florida by tomorrow afternoon. You're going to obviously have first responders and everyone on the scene immediately and doing what they can. But you're going to be able to get back. You're going to be able to resume your life. But just make sure that you're putting yourself in a situation where you can safely weather this storm. So you still have time. Time is running out. But if you make that decision now, I think you'll be glad you did. Yep.
A lot of people are choosing to stay in Sarasota, Charlotte County. What's your message to those people that are choosing to stay in their homes?
Well, if you're not in an evacuation zone, I would imagine, because there's a lot of population in some of those areas, like Kevin said, if you're going to hunker down like that, you're basically going to be, if you're not in a flood, you're basically going to be concerned about the wind. And this is a strong storm. So if you start to hear popping, if you start to hear trees snapping, you got to treat that like a tornado, and you got to hunker down because you're going to have debris, you're going to have trees, you're going to have things that could potentially fly around and cause a threat to your life. Now, if you are in an evacuation zone and you're in places like Sarasota or Charlotte, just know that if you get 10 feet of storm surge, you can't just hunker down with that. That is ultimately the surge. Mother Nature is going to win that fight. So I think it's hazardous to be staying, particularly on those barrier islands in Sarasota County, particularly on the barrier islands and other parts of coastal Charlotte County. And so if you're in an evacuation zone, you can just get up, go to one of the many shelters that are available. Maybe you have friends and family close by. Maybe you want to get on the interstate. I would say that's going to be a little dicey, but some people will want to do that. So you still have time to do it. But we don't know, look, this track of this storm, where it hits, and is it landfall going to be at Sarasota? Is it going to be further north, further south? Just understand, if you're on the southern part of this storm, you are going to get storm surge. So maybe it doesn't hit Charlotte County, maybe it hits Sarasota. Man, you're going to get a lot of storm surge further down south. That's just the reality. I mean, it's churning massive amounts of water, and that water is going to come out. There may be parts where it sucks it out, depending on how the storm goes in northern side of the storm. That's possible. But man, if you're anywhere in the eye or south, for sure, you are going to get major storm surge.
Any estimate on how many people have actually heeded the evacuation call?
Sure.
I mean, we've had way higher volumes on our interstate system than we normally do.
I mean, it was on a Monday. I think I-75 was 150% of what it really was, what it normally is. And that's not the best road anyways. I mean, you start getting close to Ocala, some of these places. I mean, you could just have standstill traffic there. I-4, same thing. Much more than we normally have. But I think anyone that's driven in Central Florida knows you get on I-4 near like Champions Gate in some of these places. That's part of the reason why we're doing Moving Florida Forward, doing all that. And like it needs to get done, and we're accelerating that. But there's bad traffic anyways, but there was a lot of people on the road. And then I think yesterday to see Alligator Alley at 150% of its normal, that's telling you that there are a lot of people that have done that. And we've stressing the availability of local shelters. Anytime you evacuate, there's going to be a certain amount of hazard for that because there's a lot of people on the road, especially if conditions start to get bad. The safest thing is drive that 10 miles, 15 miles, wherever, go to the shelter. But you don't have to do that. A lot of people haven't done that. I'm a little surprised at the number of the shelters. I thought it'd be a little bit higher. But I also think, if the storm wasn't going to hit till Wednesday night or Thursday morning, a lot of people wouldn't want to stay in a shelter Monday or Tuesday night. So I do think you're going to see the shelters. I think that number is going to go up today throughout all those counties that are in the eye of the storm. And of course, we have the state shelters. That's up on the DEM website where you can see all those. Those are going to be, it's like big. Those are all thousands of people can fit in each one of those. And we thank, we've had businesses that have leased it out. I know we did Hard Rock. We've done a bunch of stuff. You're going to have internet, you're going to have a generator, there's going to be power. Again, it's not going to be the Four Seasons, but it is going to be something that's going to be tolerable for a night. And so if you're in a situation where you're just hoping that you don't get hit with massive storm surge, those are going to be really, really good options for you to do.
So obviously the storm is very dangerous, and you've been pushing for evacuations and whatnot. There's also misinformation out there that I think even a member of your team has tried to dispel online. I know the FEMA administrator brought up other reports of misinformation. I just want to know your thoughts
What
on
specific misinformation are you talking?
there was one. I don't want to, there was one tweet that was telling people not to evacuate because there was some collusion between FEMA and a security team that wouldn't let people back into their homes. That was obviously. I know,
Guys, listen. I think most people are wise to this. You know, we live in an era where if you put out crap online, you can get a lot of people to share it, and you can monetize that. That's just the way it is. But if you're hearing something that's just outrageous, just know, in the state of Florida, none of that stuff would ever fly. So you don't have to worry about that. FEMA is not leading this show. We are leading this show here in the state of Florida. We're marshaling whatever assets are available to us. We're leveraging that. But certainly with people evacuating, in my executive order, I put in on Saturday that the default is you have a right to immediately return to your home following the storm. Now, there may be some circumstances that are not usual, but I mean, if a bridge is about to collapse, if there's real massive hazards, if there's active rescues going on, but the default is you get back. You can't just say, oh, we're just going to keep people off for 48 hours because we think it'll be easier to clean up debris. No. This is your private property. This is your home. You have a right to go back. So that's in our executive order. That'll be something that we work towards to make sure that that's the case. It's important that people are able to get back. And I'd also note, we talk about the debris. You had all this debris, right? These contractors, some of them were doing a lousy job, others weren't. And we decided to take it on ourselves to go really surge people and supplement that. But by keeping the landfills open 24/7, there was a lot of private citizens that were going cleaning up debris, bringing them back. And these guys got like Ford F-250s. They're bringing them back to the landfill drop-in. That was a huge help. So there's not going to be anything where FEMA is ever going to be able to keep you from your home. Be careful about the nonsense that gets circulated, and just know that the more titillating it is, the more likely somebody is making money off of it, and they don't really give a damn about the well-being and safety of the people that are actually in the eye of this storm. It's all just trying to monetize what they're doing. And I know there's been a lot of stuff about what FEMA's done in other states. Look, I haven't been there. I don't know. But I can tell you in Florida, we are leading this train. We're marshaling all available resources, federal, state, and we're supporting local. And that's the way it's going to be. So you can have confidence in that. Yes, sir.
It's coming up on 11 o'clock right now. Roads are passable and encouraging evacuation. Have you guys, based on the size of the storm and the speed it's moving, have you picked a time of when people should not hit the roads and when they should shelter in place?
We haven't, because I think it just depends on where you are, what the conditions are. I would say that the conditions are going to get worse throughout the rest of today. So these local shelters are a great option to be able to go and drive a few miles, get into a shelter, and then just ride out the storm is not going to be a problem. I mean, if you leave right now, go to your local shelter, you're fine, right? If you leave right now and you get on the interstate and you want to drive to Pensacola, look, just know that you're going to start to see some hazards. We do have fatalities on the roads with almost every storm. So the risk that you're assuming is a lot higher than if you just go to a local shelter. So I wouldn't want to say there's like a hard and fast time where you just can't. I think now you can go to the local shelter, but I would say even starting now, when you start talking about the interstate, you are going to see conditions deteriorate throughout today. And there is a lot of rain. There's problems in different parts right now. People get it. There's bands and whatnot. And it's not going to be right now hurricane force right now, but still, this is something that could be problematic. And so, I mean, I just think like if you're elderly or something like that, what would be the better option? Like, I would advise probably just going to the shelter right now rather than trying to get on the interstate, and go visit your kids or something. So, but people can make that decision based on what is in front of them at the time. There will come a time probably where once we start getting the tropical storm force winds, where it is definitely going to be too dangerous. I don't think we're there now, but I think that's rapidly approaching.
Regarding the shelters, basically for people who are displaced after this storm, will they be able to go to these shelters? If they go to their house and it's destroyed, will they?
I think let Kevin talk. I think these shelters are to ride out the storm. We've worked with counties with Helene on sheltering availability for post-storm. I don't know that these are necessarily the same things on that, but we have had that mission. Do you want to address?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. What I'll say to that is, again, to the governor's point, these private sector locations are what we would refer to as the shelters of last resort. Again, they're not the Four Seasons. They're cots in a warehouse in some cases. Our biggest facility is a warehouse that's right next to our new facility in Auburndale. But what we will do, because this is a point of emphasis for the governor, he's given me this direction, hear it loud and clear. When this storm is over, we need to get kids back at school. We need to get community and life back up and running, and we're going to be committed to doing that. My goal that I charge the team out there on the floor with is, let's get kids back in school in 3 to 5 school days after landfall. We're going to do that. To be successful at that, we're going to have people that are going to be in long-term sheltering. So we were going to have to open up other big box stores. Now, what we will do there is, where we're in warehouses right now along the interstate corridors, we will start looking for maybe those mall big box stores, something that may have even been right on the edge of an evacuation zone or a flood zone. For example, there's a really good place, Gulf Square Mall in Pasco County, Hudson. That is in an evacuation zone. That is in a flood zone. We would never go there to put people in harm's way. But after the fact, that might be a very good place to go and open a recovery shelter while we get kids back at school. Thank you.
Yesterday it was said that the state will ask FEMA for a waiver allowing more contractors out of state to come to Florida. Has FEMA responded to that?
Don't believe so, have they?
No, sir. We're still working with that, putting that on a letter. We got 3 options. We're just trying to get the best option that's going to have a path of least resistance.
Great.
Related to the schools part of that, to kind of what Director Guthrie was talking about, I believe after Ian, there was a situation where some of the schools were just too damaged to actually have kids back in there. Is that something you just have to wait and see where the storm hits? And
That'll be that. We'll assess that at the time. I know, like on Sanibel, for example, those kids went to different school at that point across the bridge. It's a lot easier when we fixed the Sanibel Causeway, so they were able to do that. That may happen here. We'll see, but that'll likely be driven by the school districts make a decision, and then we'll be able to offer probably some support for that through our Department of Education. But these are things that are live possibilities. A storm of this magnitude, you are going to have some of these the schools that could be damaged. Now, I would say most of the schools that are not like on barrier islands, these are good structures mostly, and that's why we use them for shelters. So I would imagine you'll see some damage inland, but probably not to the extent that we saw on the barrier islands after Ian. On these barrier islands at the schools, they're kind of in the similar spot. It's a big storm, and you could have some damage, and it may not be as simple as just being able to get people back in after 3 days. Okay.
Regarding basically the people who are staying behind, and the police are going door to door in some places, are you guys being told who these people are and their locations, and are you?
That's a local thing. I know the sheriffs and the first responders on the county basis, they're doing that. What I've always said is, you are being warned on this. You've seen, just think about Helene on these Gulf Coast in central Florida. It was 100 miles away, and you still had feet of storm surge where there were fatalities as a result of that. This is one that's going to be potentially delivering even more surge than what we saw in Pinellas and Manatee. Almost definitely will deliver more surge in some of these areas. And so that is hazardous. That is life-threatening. And you'd be wise to go to a shelter, ride it out, but rather than try to mess with that. And if there are a lot of people that do stay behind, unfortunately, there will be fatalities. I don't think there's any way around it when you have storm surge that could be 10 feet. So you have time to do that. There's going to be people who are going to be in distress. We are going to, working with the locals, we're going to conduct rescue operations. We will do that. And a lot of those were successful last time in the Helene. But, why would you want to risk it at this point? So this is this is a big storm. It's going to do a lot of damage. It's going to create a lot of threats to life. It's obviously going to destroy property. We're bracing for that, but we're doing everything we can to try to mitigate the damage beforehand, and we'll do everything we can to help with rescues and getting people back on their feet afterwards. Okay, thanks.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to Jordan Roan Live. It's Jordan Roan, and we are just hours away from landfall hitting the west coast of Florida. Devastation as a result of Hurricane Milton is imminent. Officials in Florida and the federal government are warning everyone who is along the path of destruction to evacuate immediately. There is not much time left in order to do so. And if you're in Florida, get up, pack up, get your things ready, and find safe ground. This is among the most devastating storms that will hit Florida, that will impact the United States of America. So please heed the warnings before it is too late, because it will become too late in just hours. Stay tuned and subscribe for the latest coverage. As you can see on your screen, we are providing you round-the-clock live feeds of Hurricane Milton approaching Florida. Top left of your screen is Tampa Bay, Florida. As you can see, cars going over a bridge, the water beginning to rise. On the right, top right of your screen, we're live from Key West, Florida, where the trees shaking in the wind. Bottom left screen is Sarasota, Florida, and the bottom right screen is a live forecast path of Hurricane Milton. As you can see, the expectation is by tonight, Wednesday night, Category 3 hurricane will slam into the west coast with the eye of the storm hitting Sarasota, Florida. But as we know, this storm can change rapidly, and it can always go a little bit to the north and hit Tampa, a little bit to the south, hit Fort Myers as well as Cape Coral. So please, folks, stay tuned, stay covered, stay safe. Thoughts and prayers with the people of Florida today, the hours to come, and the weeks to follow. I'm Jordan Roan. This is Jordan Roan Live. Stay tuned. Stay subscribing for more. Thanks to everyone out there watching. It's Jordan Roan with Jordan Roan Live. We are covering the storm. What could be the storm of the century with Hurricane Milton making landfall just hours from now. We're covering live in Florida. As you can see, top left of your screen is Tampa Bay, top right Key West, bottom left is Sarasota, and on the bottom right of your screen is a live forecast path of Hurricane Milton. Landfall coming approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, with the eye of the storm set to slam into Sarasota, Florida. There could also be the chance of it going north or south into Tampa, as well as Fort Myers, but regardless, there will be a large radius of at least 30 miles where this storm is going to impact. And if you're in that 30-mile radius, then it can be a life or death decision as to whether or not you evacuate now. So please heed the advice of local officials and do what you can to get to safety. You will not regret evacuation. But as we know, people do regret staying in the eye of the storm. So stay safe out there, everyone. Make sure you subscribe for the latest details. We will continue the live feed throughout the day, throughout this storm, to make sure you are watching what's happening on the ground live. Thanks so much for joining us. Continue to stay tuned, folks, and pray for those who are in the path.
Myers up through Tampa to Cedar Key along the West Coast, all the way through the I-4 corridor across Orlando to Daytona Beach, up to St. Augustine, including the Cape Canaveral area and the East Coast down to Port St. Lucie. So a large area is at risk of seeing devastating wind impacts, widespread power outages, structural damage, and that could lead to a very unsafe environment after the storm, where we tend to see a lot of post-storm fatalities in this very dangerous environment that's left. Additionally, we are expecting very heavy rainfall, 6 to 12 inches, amounts as high as 18 inches across the heavily populated I-4 corridor from Tampa to Orlando to Daytona Beach, which could lead to widespread catastrophic and life-threatening flash flooding and urban flooding tonight and into Thursday in that area. And that's an area where we lost about 16 people in Hurricane Ian to that same type of flooding. So there's a tremendous risk to both life and property there. I do want to thank the administrator and FEMA and her for her team's support and our coordination on that. And I finally want to thank the NOAA and Air Force Reserve hurricane hunters who've been flying into Milton for days now, providing us just tremendously valuable direct data that has really helped inform our life-saving forecast in mornings. So thank you, Mr. President, Madam Vice President.
Mike, I know you're tired of hearing from me. I've been talking to you so much lately. I appreciate your constant input you've given me and let me know what's going on. What more can you tell us about how the location of this storm is going to affect the storm surge in Florida? I mean, because that's pretty consequential, right? The surge. I mean, that's what you're focusing on?
Yes, Mr. President. Just a shift of a few miles in the landfall location will make a big difference in what area sees that very worst storm surge. So a track of the center to the north of Tampa Bay would push the highest storm surge into Tampa Bay itself. A track 5 or 10 or 20 miles south would push that higher storm surge, say, down to the Sarasota, Port Charlotte area. Even as close as we are to landfall, it's not really possible to tell exactly where that worst surge will occur. It's one wobble away from shifting 10 or 20 miles. So that's why we've conveyed that risk across such a large area to help support the evacuation of much of that west central coast of Florida.
But Tampa Bay is particularly vulnerable, correct?
Correct. Yes, Mr. President. It's one of the most vulnerable locations along the entire west coast of Florida because water gets funneled up into the bay. If you were to see a worst case scenario there, you could see storm surge as much as twice as high as they saw during Helene, where it got up to 7 or 8 feet in the bay. It could potentially get up above 10 feet in this event.
Well, thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate it.
Hey, Mike. It's good to see you again, and thank you for all your work. So for the folks who have been living in Florida a long time and have experienced these storms many times, how are you talking with them about how this is going to be different, and so the difference between what they're used to and what this will be as a way to hopefully give them more encouragement to know that they need to get out?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice President. Yes, we've been emphasizing the size and the intensity of the storm and the direction at which it's approaching, which is unusual and really raises that storm surge risk for the west coast of Florida. We typically see hurricanes approach the west coast of Florida from the south or southeast, moving parallel to the coast. This track more perpendicular to the coast really raises the storm surge risk. And the size of the storm is going to produce hazardous impacts across much of the peninsula. So we've been hitting the surge risk on both coasts, actually, the hurricane force winds, the flooding rainfall threat, the tornadoes, and trying to re-emphasize the scale and breadth of the threat, which is somewhat unusual for Milton.
Thank you, and thanks for your good work. It's good
Mike,
to see
one
you
more
again.
question.
Yes, sir.
For people listening, what is the width of the state of Florida from the Tampa Bay area across to Sebastian Inlet in that area to Palm Beach? What kind of distance are we talking about?
Across the state of Florida, you're probably talking about, 150, 200 miles. That's an estimate, but the storm's going to be moving at 15 miles per hour. So it's going to be moving across that area very quickly. And the tropical storm force winds, the 30, 40 mile per hour winds or greater, now extend almost out more than 200 miles from the center. They're going to get even larger as the storm approaches the coastline. So that's going to cause those wind impacts to affect much of the state.
The reason I asked the question is I think, at least for me, having done a lot of this the last 3 years, emphasizes the consequential damage this storm can do. I mean, it's going to enter Florida on the west as a hurricane and leave as a hurricane. And that's pretty unusual. Anyway, thank
It
you.
is. Yes, yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will move on now to the National Weather Service Director, Ken Graham.
All right, thanks, Liz. I appreciate it, and wanted to thank Administrator Criswell for everything through this, and Dr. Brennan as well. The Hurricane Center has been really focused on this and on it with such a great forecast the whole way. I just wish we could minimize those impacts, but that doesn't look like what's going to happen. So, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, we continue to work at the National Weather Service with our federal, state, and local decision makers during the storms. We actually have our scientists embedded with FEMA, the state and local emergency operations centers, and we also have our scientists embedded with the U.S. Coast Guard District 7 to really help out with these decisions to make sure they're right there to answer the questions as they come up. They're covering really the subtleties, as you've mentioned in this forecast. Dr. Brennan mentioned those small changes can make a big difference. Little wiggles really do matter. Those small wobbles make a difference in the storm surge. And all these big storms, they wobble and wiggle all the way in. We'll see that happening as this gets closer to landfall. So as Administrator Criswell said, listen to those local officials. I can't stress enough, 30 years with NOAA, 30 years in the Weather Service. This is a particularly dangerous track. People really need to be getting into their safe locations as the impacts start deteriorating really quickly over the next few hours. Words really matter in these storms. Even if the winds decrease somewhat near landfall, we really try to avoid words like weaken. It really gives a false sense of security to the public. So we really want to stress that no matter what happens to that, the wind speed in this system, catastrophic impacts will result either way. The size of the wind speed, the actual size of it will be expanding, as Dr. Brennan was saying. So much of that impact will cover most of the peninsula. And Mr. President, like you said, Milton, think about it. I just goes over in my mind over and over. Milton will enter as a hurricane and exit as a hurricane. So you'll see damage from the landfall point on the west coast, and you'll see damage on the east coast as well. So it's really important to focus on those impacts. Again, seeing those impacts on both coasts. We're really starting to see the impacts as we speak. I was just looking at the radar before doing this meeting here, and we've got tornadoes already touching down in some spots in Florida, and some have been confirmed that have touched down as well. And about 90% of those tornadoes occur on that right front quadrant of a tropical system. So we're really, our folks at the Weather Service are on duty 24 hours a day, watching that radar to make sure that we can get those warnings out quickly to people so they can take cover. And as Dr. Brennan said, think about it, Mike, right, 140 miles wide, now we're 200, and we expect it to be greater than 240 miles away from the center with these winds. So that's a huge area that we can see some of that damage. Very concerned about the storm surge, and I wanted to double down on something. It's not just Tampa Bay with that 8 to 12 foot forecast, or 10 to 15 down to Boca Grande. I mean, you could see 5 to 8 feet of storm surge all the way down to Chokoloskee. Think about Fort Myers, Naples, well away from that center. We just got to really keep reminding people they're not safe, even though you're not not near the center of the storm. So we'll continue to really message that as we can. The other part of this, flooding could last a while. So unlike other areas with elevation, there's not much elevation in Florida. So some of these rivers are going to be slow to drain. Some of these rivers could stay up for about a week after the storm, and the storm surge will act as a blocker to drain some of that rain from the inland area. So that could really be add some challenges to some communities with the flooding and recovery efforts, as some of the roads will be pretty impassable. So, I was looking at this, Mr. President, Madam Vice President. Yesterday I said the clock was ticking. Today I'm saying the alarm bell's going off. People really need to start getting into their safe place. As always, the Weather Service remains on duty 24/7 to make sure decision makers have all the information they need and the updates to this storm.
Ken, I'd like to focus on one thing you said. I don't think most people would think it, but the idea that sometimes it takes days for rivers to crest after a major storm like this. Are there any particular areas of concern that that are related to this type of flooding? And how long do you think the flooding conditions could last? In other words, I think people think once the winds are died down and gotten through that, okay, we're all set. But these rivers flooding are consequential, and it takes time, right?
it takes time. That storm surge pushes up every nook and cranny of Florida. So it goes up bays, goes up rivers, it fills in all these areas. And then you add that incredible amount of rainfall, and that rain can't drain because the storm surge has it blocked. So just really looking at some of the areas in Hillsborough River, Alafaya River, Peace River, some of these type of traditional places that could flood, we really got to watch those areas and those communities. So it takes quite a while for that water to drain.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Ken, I have a question for you. You mentioned words matter, and I know there's a lot of media following this briefing. So there have been, we've gone from a Cat 5 to a Cat 4, and the language that a lot of folks have been using is downgrade. But it sounds like you're cautioning us that that may communicate a sense that the danger is lessened when in fact it's not. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know a lot of folks are watching right now and would love to have your feedback on how we should be talking about this.
Yeah, we need everybody that communicates to the public to be on the same page with the words, because I've 30 years of doing this. I've seen this so many times. People will think, oh, it was a Cat 5, now it's a Cat 3. That's not a reason to relax. It's not weakened. That's not diminished. That means that we've expanded the wind field. The impacts don't change associated with that. And I've seen this in Hurricane Florence and other historic hurricanes. So we have to be mindful of the words that we use and focus on those impacts. Those impacts haven't changed no matter what the wind speed does over the next 24 hours.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Graham. We'll go now to Secretary Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security. Ali, over to you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Mr. President, Madam Vice President, if I can just pick up on the important phrase, the words matter. I want to thank you for the strength and moral clarity with which you have been speaking to bat down false information that is being spread. That false information is only hurting survivors in need of help. And it is also hurting the first responders who are so bravely risking their lives to deliver that help to the survivors. Mr. President, Madam Vice President, we are executing on your directive to not only rely on FEMA to provide emergency relief, but to draw upon other resources throughout the Department of Homeland Security and throughout the federal government, throughout your administration. I know you will hear from the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Linda Fagan. The United States Coast Guard has deployed almost 1,300 personnel to Florida, not just for search and rescue, but also to ensure the safety and security of the port of Tampa, which is a critical lifeline for supplies that are needed by Florida and elsewhere. I want to also say that our U.S. Customs and Border Protection has devoted search and rescue personnel as well as other parts of our department. To give you just a quick snapshot of some of the resources that are devoted from other parts of the administration, the Department of Defense is providing search and rescue, commodity movement, commodity distribution, and security to Florida. We already have 1.5 million meals and 2.8 million liters of water ready to provide to people in need. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is providing temporary power, temporary roofing, debris removal support, and engineering expertise. The U.S. Forest Administration is also providing debris removal. This is absolutely critical so that our search and rescue personnel can reach the people in need and provide them with the humanitarian relief upon which they rely. Health and Human Services is providing hospital and health-related support. The Small Business Administration has dedicated 137 personnel to assist people who have lost or whose businesses are destroyed, to get them back up on their feet and understand what resources are available to them. We have an entire administration dedicated to this effort at your direction. And with that, I'll pause.
Hey, Ali, Mr. Secretary, do you have everything you need from all the federal departments and the agencies in support of this response? Is there anything lacking?
We certainly do have all of the resources. We are well positioned to continue to respond to Hurricane Helene, to respond to Hurricane Milton. Mr. President, we are meeting the moment and meeting the challenges because of the extraordinary people who've spoken before me.
Well, I want to thank the governors. They've stepped up. All this disinformation going out about how, we're devoting all this money to migrants, and even one congresswoman suggesting that I control the weather and implying that I'm sending it to red states. I mean, it's stuff off the wall. It's like out of a comic book. But, people, when they're in trouble, or for example, and I asked this to our administrator, they said that you get $750 and that's it. You lost everything, you get $750. That's not it. That's just give you immediately what you need to get by the next day, to get a prescription, to get a whatever. Are you getting calls already about what we're going to be able to deliver for people who get in trouble?
We are, Mr. President. Let me say that one of the false narratives is that the federal employees who are actually delivering assistance will take an individual's land, and that is causing individuals, survivors, not to approach the people who are there to help and obtain the relief to which they are entitled and that we have available to them. And the Vice President knows very well, as a former prosecutor, that false information only is fuel for the criminal element to exploit individuals